So, just like Borderlands 2 and Assassin's Creed Syndicate, Resident Evil 7 is one of those lucky games that actually got the post-release support that most of these big hoo-ha companies brag about, but more often than not don't deliver on. Resi 7 comes with 3 moderately substantial story-ish DLCs, and we are going to start at the start with this series with the DLC that got split in half for more profit, I suppose. Or maybe Capcom did develop this out gradually, which would be a little odd considering what you got for shelling out the dough. I'm not really going to comment on price points in this series because I bought the complete edition of Resi 7, which came with everything for an additional $10. So my opinion is that for all the DLC together for $10, it's definitely a great buy to go for if you can swing it. Getting back on track, this review is only going to tackle around half of the content available in banned footage, the reason being that Nightmare Mode and the 55th birthday scenario sounded like those survival against the clock modes, where the game just tosses an endless wave of enemies at you with diminishing resources, and just seeing how long you can last. Steam derivatives have been churning out endless amounts of these cookie-cutter game modes, and from there, I have zero interest in such nonsense. But to be fair, I did play Nightmare and did get up to the 3rd wave on my first attempt, I believe, before death, so if you want an opinion on the Nightmare mode, the difficulty curve I would say is fair. Crafting does expand upon multiple playthroughs, you do get access to more weapons later on, and it's at least greatly developed even if the stuff you're fighting is just assets the game already had. So let's start with Bedroom, which feels like an honest deleted scene from the main game. One of those extensive VHS flashbacks where you would play a substantial part of the game in the feet of another character. Bedroom, and frankly all of banned footage, is set in the eyes of one of the camera crew that came into the Baker residence to film for a scary YouTube series. Topical, ain't it? And if you thought Ethan got beaten to shit in the main game, he has nothing going on the tortures that these undeserving jerkwads got, even foregoing that one that got burned to death in a comedic Saw puzzle that got totally out of hand. Thankfully, our person of the day doesn't have to go through much more than that. Oh wait, he will about 7 or 8 times once you finally figure out what you're doing, because the scenario this time around is that well, I guess I have to call him something. Let's call him Timmy, just for giggles. Timmy here is being held captive by Marguerite instead of Lucas, who's basically trying to get him to eat live worms and cockroaches under the threat of being stabbed in the face. Thankfully, Marguerite's redneck handcuffs were easily defeated in about 10 seconds once a spoon got involved. After Timmy frees himself from the cuffs, the player is then forced to defeat one of Capcom's most devious tricks ever devised: an escape the room puzzle. Yep, straight from the Newgrounds schoolyard, this is a straight-up escape the room puzzle. But it does come with one twist that turns the whole thing on its head. While you are dealing with the usual puzzle game lunacy of this sort of thing, throughout solving the puzzle, the elements of the puzzle will start making noise. Essentially, loud clocks will ring, and they will alarm Marguerite to come back to the room to check on Timmy. The player is then given a timer in which they have to reset all the visual elements of the puzzle back to what they were before and get back in the handcuffs before the timer elapses. Your usual escape the room puzzle is summed up as a game that eventually boils down to either alt-tabbing to a walkthrough or simply clicking every item against everything else in the search to find the one shit-covered thread of non-sequitur in a giant Gordian knot of dumbassery. Whereas forcing the player to basically unsolve the entire puzzle periodically puts in some legit energy and edge-of-seat suspense to a concept that can so easily become mundane as eggshell paint. Especially that moment after the timer ends and Marguerite is literally inspecting your handiwork, and you have no clue if she's going to flip out or not. However, this praise for puzzle design gets immediately countered by the fact that Capcom is teaching you how the puzzle works through trial and error. I was not kidding at the top of this piece when I was talking about failing this puzzle 7 or 8 times. I estimate that to be average by how I was playing it blind. Not only do you have to die to Marguerite to figure out the unsolving the puzzle mechanic, but you are also going to be forced into this multiple times to mentally gather how many elements of the puzzle she can actually see. Plus, the failure cutscenes can actually last quite a while with no way of skipping them, so it's not only an irritating part of the game, but one that's also trying my patience. Another big issue is that a critical item is literally hidden from you until you either randomly find it or grab the walkthrough, because there is absolutely no way to logically find the knife you need to kill Marguerite with when it's behind the damn dresser, an object which you can't move. While it's a less annoying part of the puzzle, requiring that you have to fool Marguerite twice before you're given the oven is also kinda dumb. In a puzzle game, I would think that you should have all the items available to you right at the start so you can start getting the follow-up items and therefore have all the toys in the box to start solving the puzzles instead of waiting for the game to give them all to you arbitrarily. And finally, one of the real shit kickers of dumb design in the bedroom puzzle is the last puzzle where you have to quote-unquote kill Marguerite and leave. You need the knife, which is hidden from the player behind the dresser and never alluded to existing, so you don't know about, and therefore you are most likely going to get caught with your pants down and have to do the entire freaking puzzle over again. What kills the pace of the puzzle is a lack of mid-puzzle checkpoints for an escape the room game that's killing you all the time. So getting killed right at the end is a real roundhouse kick to the nose. It's not like there's a ton of murder-ready objects in the side room that you can use as a substitute to the knife. Hell, have Timmy kick the door out and he'll stun her for a bit for at least a starting gambit. Take the projector object and beat her to death with it. I don't freaking know. Why the hell is the knife the only option? Bottom line is that Bedroom is a pretty great brain scratcher of a puzzle, let down by a failure of Capcom to have any sort of speed the bullshit up option for a puzzle built on repeated deaths. Now we'll move on to 21, another of Capcom's ideas on the shelf that never made it into the main game because of how absurd it is, even for Resident Evil. Yes, we are playing silly buggers now because this small game is mainlined by Lucas, wannabe of the wannabe Saw pretenders. The reason that this game is so out there compared to other Resi mainstays is that it revolves around a game of cards. Of course, it wouldn't be as simple as that. Capcom tries to think the game being so simple compared to other games of cards actually adds in a lot more strategy to proceedings, but that really isn't true. Just because there are only 12 cards in the deck doesn't really mean much when all the remaining cards still have an equal chance to be played, and you are still pretty likely to get a 7, 8, or 9 in the deck along with a 2 or 3, and there's not a lot that changes between whatever card gets spit out. Plus, the game runs into a lot of the issues with the random number generator, meaning that rather than the game being based around any sort of skill, there's just a ton of luck that you have to roll the dice on, and the game is definitely not playing you any favorites. To be fair to the game of 21, Lucas does try to shake it up down the line by adding in trump cards. Are we still allowed to say trump cards in this new time? Okay. Now, the trump card idea was a decent one to give the player some control over the game that they are playing, but the problem is that there is no real limit on how many trump cards are in the game, nor what trump card you'll eventually be getting, which means that there is still a lot of dumb luck and RNG on the line, even if you have these in your pocket. Mostly because the limited number of hands you'll be allowed to play before dying makes you forced to use the trump cards if your hand is going badly, or you'll start on the slippery slope to Dead Man's Lane. Of course, this being a Lucas-inspired game, the only thing you have to bet little Timmy on is the remaining number of days you have on this happy little planet. The game starts off straightforward enough, where you'll be betting the fingers on your hand in a gruesome torture machine of his own making in the game before Lucas moves it up into the next round, mostly because the kidnapped victim you're opposite decides to bet his life on the game to get out of the situation, instead of Lucas forcing that issue. The dude's trying to get to the audience's heartstrings by constantly mentioning his family that he has to get back to, but since we never see the damn guy's face, let's just say that the attempt is pretty hollow, especially in such a do-or-die situation. Like, Just because the other guy has slightly less to live for doesn't mean he's going to lie down and ask for his execution. I mean, come on. The big difference between this and the bedroom scenario is that Capcom had the good grace to put down some checkpoints throughout the hands you have to play, which mitigates a lot of the annoyances that having such an RNG-driven game could have on your DLC quality. I suppose something else I could mention is that the game having this meter measuring how close each player is to death is a pretty pointless gambit due to how rapidly Lucas scales up the bets for each hand, meaning that even in a competitive round, you'll usually be playing 3 or 4 hands before someone loses just to how crazy high the bet actually is. And this also means that once you start losing, then it becomes incredibly difficult to dig yourself out of that hole, especially if you're just a victim of bad timing on your trumps. One part I did find pretty hilarious was the final round, where instead of giving the player a break once the opponent is fried to death, Lucas thought it would be hilarious to force Timmy to play the last round against the guy's corpse. But what makes the final round so tragically funny is the fact that Lucas decided to tie a puppet string to the corpse and is flailing it around all over the place throughout the hand, and he also decides to do an absurdly horrendous impression of the guy's voice, which you really have to hear to believe.
Are you trying to kill me? I thought we were friends, Clancy. Clancy, just give up. Stop being selfish and die already.
Like, look at me, I'm Jimmy Neutron, whoa! Okay, so after that, we get to the final trick that 21 has up its sleeve, and it's a plot turn so deviously clever that it'll most likely fly over the heads of a majority of the people playing this. Which again, isn't a huge deal, since if you do fall for the trick, the game gives you a hint on how to beat it right after, and the game checkpoints at the beginning of the last round, so it isn't the worst thing in the world. So, what is the trick, and how do you finally win 21? Here's the rub. During the final round, Lucas will hand out a trump card that states that the opponent will be allowed to draw the best card in the deck for their situation. This being given around the second hand of the round makes it look like the most useless card ever devised. That is so beyond insulting that I would rather burn it than even look at it. However, you shouldn't think that, because by the end it will actually save your life, because on the final round, no matter how well you did in the hands up to that point, Lucas will play a special trump card on the final round that increases the bet to 100, which will kill either of you 10 times over on the machine. And he also plays a card that gives him the cards in the deck that equal 21 straight out. Lucas completely screwed you over on the final round and basically made up a perfect win scenario for his puppet, and if you do anything else, you lose immediately. The trick is that you have to play that ludicrously terrible trump card to force Lucas into drawing again and force him to lose, winning you the game. It's actually a pretty good puzzle on Capcom's part, which in other games will be happy to settle on weird key and weird keyhole puzzles. I would also say that playing 21 is recommended because of the whole motif that it has going for it, the tinges of humor that it's got going for it, and the always suspenseful gambit of literally putting your life on the line for a nail-biting game of card. It's an interesting gameplay idea and definitely worth the hour or so you'll spend defeating the Faceless Man. The last entry we'll be looking at today is Daughters, the prequel DLC set at the time of the Baker family corruption event. Unlike the other two entries we've looked at, Daughters is more in line of what you would expect from Resi 7 DLC, and that's simply an extension of the game you've already played, cut down heavily. The plotline is pretty simple. The Bakers rescue Evelyn from the hurricane at that time of the season. They were a pretty normal redneck family with a lot of the odd architecture already built. Before they went totally hat stand nuts, Evelyn is allowed a warm bed for about 10 minutes before she totally screws over the Bakers, and they are given their gifts. Zoe then has to escape to her trailer and hope for the best. Puzzle-wise, it isn't great, mostly because the game is a very linear track from A to B, where the puzzle to escape Jack Baker is not signposted well, leading to a lot of pointless death. Before you realize one of the boarded up windows you can actually use to free yourself, whereupon you have to stealth around Marguerite, which wins the award for franchise's most obnoxious stealth award. It is such an infuriating bit of stealth gameplay because there's no no rhyme or reason to Marguerite's movements, where she'll go halfway up a staircase and then quickly go back down because the game was whispering to Marguerite where Zoe was hiding, even though there is no legitimate way for her to see you, and the whole thing seems deliberately designed to screw with the player. And on top of that, like the main game, there was no good animation or sign for Marguerite to tell what her vision ability is, which means a lot of trial and error, hiding behind shit, which she may or may not be able to see over, and what makes it worse is that the whole thing only needs you to stealth around like 10 to 15 feet tops, and then you'll get past and get your guaranteed bad ending. I say guaranteed because to get the good ending requires so much obtuse, nonsensical additional effort that I'm going to go ahead and bet that only 4% of people playing this got it without looking up the walkthrough. The first thing is that you need to spy on Lucas's phone where he inputs a number code, which he only does once, so you have to do it fast, and zoom in as best as you can to get the code. If you didn't see it, well, totally possible, then get to the internet. The next thing you have to do is find a button and a lockpick. Probably not in that order. The lockpick is in a pile of garbage in the crawl space because that's totally a place you'd look if you were playing this for realsies. And the button is in the bathroom. A lot better since it's the only locked drawer in the house at the moment. Take the button to a trophy in Lucas's room, which will open up the attic where you can input the code that you got from earlier, listing a bunch of fuck yous Lucas would like to give to his family. Among his ramblings, he mentions one of the dog heads for the Cerberus store, and then when you are being chased by Jack later in the story, get out on the second floor patio and find a locked toolbox. Inside there is a dog head motif, which is only found if you unlock Lucas's laptop because Capcom. Stealth around Marguerite to the Cerberus door and use the dog head to unlock it and you get your good ending. Frankly, the whole thing is so fucking stupid that I don't know how the people making this weren't unconsciously punching themselves in the head, thinking that this was a good idea. Here's the thing about puzzle games. They're a lot more satisfying when the player is allowed the chance to solve it themselves. You make it too hard and they'll be forced to Google. You make it too easy and then it's just a walking simulator, and if you put horrendous puzzles in it, then I'll toss the disc into a fire and forget the whole thing. The daughter's scenario requires so much ridiculous crap on top of the normal stuff you already have to do that is totally unsolvable by normal human beings, and the quote-unquote ending you get is not remotely worth the amount of hair pulling you would need to do to get it right. Then there's the caveat that bad moral choices like to do and basically guilt trip you to go after the good ending because you fucked up by following the normal pace and flow of the game you were playing. I know that this video has been taking kind of a long time, but please remember that it was a review of a bunch of mini games, so time has to be taken. I hope that whet your appetite on whether or not to get the complete edition of Resi 7. I highly recommend it myself, but my opinion on banned footage is that it's deliberately designed a mixed bag. But in this case, it's not so bad since the different modes available give something substantial for anybody playing. Hey, you didn't like 55th Birthday? Have you tried the bedroom? Hey, you got killed and Ethan Must Die? Maybe Nightmare is more your speed? Pissed off that you can't get the good ending in Daughters? Maybe try 21. At the very least, Capcom put some nice production value and time into each of these modes they had developed, and they are somewhat fun with well-built storylines to keep things moving. Banned footage gets a thumbs up from me with the addendum that I did not even try 55th Birthday or Ethan Must Die.